Ladies and gentlemen, hello. My name is Dimitar Lilkov, Senior Research Officer at the Martin Center. Absolute pleasure to see you live, and a warm welcome to our online viewers as well. Today's topic is focused on building a true European energy union. And in the last couple of months, we have seen how Russia's unprovoked and barbaric war in Ukraine has also spiraled in another direction, an escalation with the European Union when it comes to energy. And the Gazprom blackmail, the blackmail on gas, has meant skyrocketing energy prices in Europe and has also meant a global challenge, a major challenge for overall energy security. Of course, the European Union has taken a number of steps to prevent this, to diversify from Russian gas, also to make sure that we have invested in improved common gas storage, but we're not out of the woods yet. So for today's panel, we want to focus on the next steps for the EU, how we can make sure that we can have a resilient European energy union, and what collective steps can the European member states achieve together. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a stellar panel of experts today. Jerzy Buzek, long-standing member of the European Parliament, also one of the initial proponents, by the way, of the European Energy Union back in the days, also former president of the European Parliament. Pleasure to have you. Brenda Shaffer is joining us from the US, Professor Brenda Shaffer, who is an international energy expert and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Also, she is part of the US Naval Postgraduate School. Thanks for joining us. Yeah. Last but not least, Philipp Offenberg, who is a senior manager at the Europe office of Breakthrough Energy here in Brussels, with an extensive experience when it comes to climate, energy, sustainability. Thank you. So let's kick it off. And President Buzek, I personally remember, by the way, in 2014, you were one of the advocates for the European Energy Union. And by the way, the whole concept of the European Energy Union was a brainchild of the European People's Party. So walk us through what happened in the last couple of years, what we got right, what we got wrong.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great possibility to say a few words about such an important issue like energy security, also for the future. We know that it's a very delicate and most political issue today. Energy security is not a technical issue. It's not about our economy even. It is about policy in the future. How to prevent such a situation like today in our continent. You ask what we have done in the European Parliament since 2014, for example. A lot of things were done, as a matter of fact. A reverse flow on the old interconnectors. We didn't have something like that in 2006 and 2009 because there were first two deep energy crises because of shortages of gas supply from Russia. So even two countries, as far as I remember, Bulgaria and Slovakia, they didn't have gas for 1 month, completely in the middle of the winter. Horrible. And in hospitals, 0 centigrade, horrible. And on the other hand, we've got our security of gas supply regulation, which is very important because our vulnerable consumers are absolutely sure that in any case it will be supply of gas, for example, gas. We've got also other energy resources, but gas is very important today and very costly. And on the other hand, we've got also regulation on third country supply to the European Union, gas supply, amending gas directive 2018. I was partly responsible for all the issues because as a leader of each committee, industry, research, energy committee in the European Parliament. And we have done a lot of things, but probably some colleagues in the European Parliament or member states on the western part of Europe, they could not imagine that Russians could treat supply of gas as a weapon. Weaponizing gas supply, it is quite new for them. For
Even though we warned them,
it was absolutely sure.
Yeah.
And we knew absolutely about that. So they learn in the last month that it's a quite new approach. On the other hand, it is something like our market economy approach. If you cooperate with some country very closely in economy, it is interdependence. Interdependence means there is no war. And in the Russian case, we know very well in Eastern Europe, it doesn't work, such a rule. But our friends from Western parts, from Spain, from Italy, from Germany, they learn very quickly. We know today a response to the Russian aggression against Ukraine is absolutely clear. In European Parliament, we've got majority 95%. You could not even imagine for our resolutions for other signals. It's impossible to achieve such a majority. So we are learning a lot as the European Union, and of course we haven't done everything what is necessary. It's absolutely right. But we prepared ourselves more or less on such a situation, so we are not dying without energy today, fortunately. Also, thanks to the United States of America. I went to the Obama administration in 2015. Commissioner Cañete cooperated with me very, very closely, Commissioner Cañete, let's say, and we decided that we should go to the United States of America and to open export from the United States of LNG and oil to Europe, especially LNG. And it started in 2015, 2016. It was our work, our activity as European Union. And in Spain, Spain and Portugal, we've got, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, possibility to import LNG to our continent.
Which is a major lifeline right now when it comes to our overall supply. I want to take this point and pivot to Brenda. And I really want to focus this conversation about energy security because, by the way, in Europe in the last couple of months, we were really fixated on the price aspect, which of course is extremely important, but we still have a major scare when it comes to our overall energy security. So how does Europe look across the pond? Walk us through. How do we look from your perspective?
First thing I think, let's talk about what's the situation in Europe and how the U.S. indeed can, play into to help with this crisis. First thing, Europe needs to face facts that the energy crisis in Europe didn't start with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Any consumer here, any utility knows that you had two energy crises prior to the Russian invasion, winter 2020, winter 2021. Not only were there huge price spikes that, again, every consumer, every utility knows about. So when you talk about it as it's not Putin's price hike, it's not about the Ukraine crisis. But also we saw the patterns where when utilities don't have enough gas, they don't go over to non-existing renewables. They go over to more coal and fuel oil. We saw this in the data, meaning 2 winters prior to the Ukraine invasion. So Europe should have noticed that when you don't have enough gas, it doesn't somehow motivate you to find more renewables. It actually motivates you to use more coal and fuel oil. And also, even the world global food crisis started before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when we saw here fertilizer factories closing in Europe and closing in the UK because of high gas prices. That led to fertilizer shortages that started the food crisis in the world. So this is in no way justifying or taking away from the awful tragedies of the invasion. But if you don't look at the roots of the energy crisis here in Europe, you're not going to solve it. And if you just say it has to do with Russia, you're not going to fix it. Another thing is the basic paradigm of how Europe approaches its energy security. So the previous decade, everything was about liberalization. If somehow we just liberalize everything, move it, let it move around on its own, and even good things like interconnectors, reverse flows, energy security will work itself out. Fast forward 10 years later, where we've basically have almost a renationalization of Europe's utilities, strong legislation on gas storage, a variety of issues, but obviously a failure of the paradigm of liberalization. But if I may even touch one of sort of the holy premises here in Europe, also renewable energy, today's current generation of renewable energy is not going to solve your energy crisis, because it isn't the binary that it's presented in all of the discussions that, well, if we don't have enough fossil fuels, we just need to produce more renewables. You know that renewables have to run on a stable base load, or you should know that it needs to run on a stable base load. And if you don't have that base load, basically renewables doesn't substitute gas. It just adds to the mix, right? So
what is baseload?
What is baseload? If you were one thing that you remember from today, basically we deliver renewables through electricity, and electricity systems of today need a stable flow of energy that doesn't change, that allows the energy system to flow. On top of that, you can put the volatile wind and solar, hydro, and other renewable sources, but you still need that base load. So it's not that increased renewables reduces significantly or eliminates your need for gas. It complements. In fact, natural gas isn't the enemy. Natural gas goes hand in hand with renewables. This was always our view in the past. And I think also in Europe you have to be thinking, and in the United States as well, when did natural gas become the enemy? For decades, it's the solution. It's the non-air pollution. It's the clean fuel. And even with emissions, there's much more emissions in agriculture than in use of natural gas. I don't want to give you guys any more ideas of closing more farms out, because if you tell Europeans that agriculture causes emissions, then they'll close down farms. But the point is that there's a lot better solution, to solving the climate crisis than getting rid of natural gas, which really has a very small impact on climate, related to almost every other sector.
With the caveat that natural gas still produces lots of methane, correct, which is also harmful in the environment, even though I fully agree with you. But the promise, which, by the way, this was Germany's thinking mostly in the last 10 years, was we have the stable flows coming from Russia to stabilize our energy needs, and this makes us have enough space to maneuver and shift to renewables. This is something which, in hindsight, this is a Faustian bargain. We give you our energy security, so you give us cheap gas. I want to put you in a discussion in a way here with Philipp, because Brenda mentioned something extremely important. She says, okay, renewables are not gonna fix the current situation. Okay, but the whole political mainstream right now in Europe pledges allegiance that renewables is the way forward to pivot away from the Russians, even though right now renewable energy still remains, it's not that abundant, it's still costly, there's intermittency issues. So how do we bridge this gap, and how do we make renewables cheaper, more accessible, and maybe smarter?
Yeah, thank you, Dimitar, for this question. So let me start with an observation. I used to be part of the Juncker team, what was called the European Political Strategy Center, and was part of building the energy union that Jerzy Buzek just now reminded us of, and fully want to verify all the points he made. This was really the time when interconnectors were built and many other things were done, but it was also the time when Europe started to introduce climate policy much more strongly in the mix. And interestingly, then in the current mandate of the von der Leyen Commission, we haven't heard about the energy union in quite a while. At least I haven't. We've heard about the Green Deal for 2 years, and now, hello there, the energy union is back, which I think, it continued with an annual State of the Energy Union all this time, but now people take notice of it again. And that's interesting. And I also want to say it's good, because I think, fully supportive of all the climate policy and the Green Deal, but we have, I think, to a certain extent forgotten a bit about the fundamentals of energy policy and how crucial they are both for our energy security but also for the climate. Where I'm working now, Breakthrough Energy is an organization that was created by Bill Gates, and our mission is to scale new technologies that will get us to net zero emissions by 2050. And from that perspective, of course, renewables are crucial. there's no way to do this without renewables, but you rightly said it's not the full answer. Yeah? When did natural gas become the enemy? I think exactly when you said, when the Germans decided we trade energy security for our version of the energy transition and we build renewables and natural gas. That has obviously failed. Now the answer in Repower EU seems to be renewables, renewables, renewables. And I say, yeah, fully, right, let's do that, right? But not alone. And my worry there is for the short term, so for the Repower EU 2027 goal of replacing Russian energy imports, renewables will be crucial, but we also need to talk about things like energy storage, and not only the lithium-ion batteries that we all know by now. We need to talk about long-duration storage, technologies that can store your electricity more than 8 hours. We need to talk about seasonal storage. We need to talk about better grids that can transport higher capacities, that are smarter. We need to talk about decentralization and digitalization, which are topics that, for me, are massively missing from the current electricity market design discourse, which is about whether we should keep marginal pricing or not. Of course, we should keep it, but we need to talk about, how do we make the system smarter, more digital, more decentral. So these are all things that are really missing in the debate, and the renewables will not work without that. And if we take the longer term perspective, which is actually what our organization is about, the 2050 net zero, then renewables are still a part of the solution, but an even smaller one. When you look at what the IEA says, they say to reach net zero emissions in 2050, we have half of the technologies to do that, renewables, wind, solar, EVs, heat pumps, you name it, but the other half is not commercially ready.
Still in development, right?
Still in development, in the lab, in demonstration phase. This can be sustainable aviation fuels, this can be green cement, green steel, and we need to scale these technologies rapidly if we want to have a chance to achieve net zero emissions. And that's also where some of our focus needs to be. Because think about it, 50 years ago, you could use solar PV to power a calculator. Today, you can power cities with it, but there were 50 years in between. And if the goal is net zero in 2050, there are, 28 years left. So all of this has to happen much, much faster.
Yeah. By the way, dear audience, this is a lively debate. If some of you here wants to pose a question, or online viewers, please refer to Slido. We'll make sure to involve your questions in the final part of this panel. President Buzek, I want to refer back again to your work in the parliament, and also not only that, but the fact that you're Polish. How do we fully pivot away from Russian gas? Because the European Union still continues to receive Russian gas. We also continue to receive also LNG exports coming from Gazprom, which very few people talk about this, but there's still quantities coming. So do you think that we can actually fully pivot from the Russians in the next couple of months, and how to actually achieve it?
Well,
tricky question.
I'm sure it is possible, but it's not easy at all. First of all, in the case of gas, we went half a year ago on the way of making it easier for the near winter. It's very important that our storage capacities in the European Union are 95% fulfillment. So 95% of our storage capacities are full of gas. It's fantastic achievement, because it was not easy at all. Last year, it was about 40–50% only. Now it's 95. It's great result. On the other hand, we've got one thing which is absolutely crucial: energy efficiency, to improve it. So consuming less energy. If we consume less energy immediately, just now, or we improve efficiency, we are better from any point of view. On the other hand, we should also think about something which is our independence from the point of view of raw materials. Because if we want to go to the renewables, and we would like to develop our storage capacities, raw materials will be absolutely crucial. And it is not easy to go forward with for example, photovoltaics or from even wind farms without some raw materials. And we were dependent on China or, well, thanks God, on United States as well. But it's not so dangerous for us at all. But if we want to be independent from the point of view of energy supply, we should have our own indigenous energy resources. It means renewable, maybe nuclear, but not everybody in the European Union can agree that is the best possible solution for the future. I don't know if we want to start such a discussion, because it's very heavy discussion. If we discuss issue of renewables and energy efficiency, energy savings, we've got 100% agreement. I'm quite sure of that. And let me remind you that 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we took on board something which was called Strategic Energy Technology Plan, set plan. And I was responsible for that in the ITRE committee 10 or 12 years ago. And we spent almost 30 billion euro for technologies, for innovation. If we want to think in let's say, short and middle time perspective, we should have a new innovation. In long term, certainly, innovation will be the most important issue. 10, 12 years ago, the cheapest energy generation, let's say electricity generation precisely, cheapest electricity generation was gas plant, to gas power plant. Now it has been changed fundamentally, because the cheapest is of course wind farms, both on offshore, especially offshore, very cheap, and even photovoltaics, also cheaper.
Can I challenge that? It's cheaper if you don't factor in the base load, which you need. You have to have that base load. And we ignore that all the time. We say, that there's grid parity in the price. But the public needs to know that they have to have a stable electricity system running, and that is part of the price. So it isn't cheaper.
It's another issue. Stability of energy system is one thing, and how it is cheap or more costly, you can compare in longer perspective, let's say half a year or 1 year, producing from wind farms or from gas power plants. In the United States, the situation is quite different, because you've got your own LNG supply. So not LNG, but you've got your own gas in your continent, in your country. So in this case, it's very easy to say that maybe gas power plants are the most interesting for your country. It's quite different in Europe. We thought we should think about that, because it is not easy to accept today's prices for electricity in our continent. And we try to overcome, and we've got much bigger problems than the United States.
Let me just jump in here, because it's an interesting discussion, which, by the way, is right now carried by our highest political leaders. They're saying, and they're openly even attacking the U.S. basically. Why is the U.S. paying less money for gas? This is a problem. Brenda, we mentioned that all the speakers that Europe has challenges in tackling this crisis on its own. How will the U.S. intervene in this? Are we talking about more LNG coming from the U.S., opening up of the oil strategic reserve, and maybe tell us why you're paying lower money for energy?
Okay, so first thing, 2 points on the availability of gas to Europe versus the United States. First thing, the United States develops its natural gas resources, and Europe doesn't by a policy choice. You also have good geography. You could be developing your gas resources. You decided not to. And by the way, the U.S. progressives are learning from the European Green New Deal, and also making it gas production will be going down in the United States, and you will be paying more for LNG because of some sort of similar prices in the United States. Second, not only do you have your own gas resources in Europe, which you decided not to develop, but you also you have great geography. You sit next to the biggest gas reserves in the world. And also these, you could have been having stable, cheap, reliable gas pipeline gas, not just from Russia, but from the Caspian, from North Africa, from the Eastern Mediterranean. All of these things you could have shepherded in, but you decided instead, no, that you didn't want to have these natural gas supplies. I heard in the previous panel that the gas supplies in Europe are not Europe's fault, but it's because of world market. This isn't true. You decided by choice that linking yourself to LNG prices, competing with Japan, South Korea, China for cargoes where they have no pipeline options is better than you using your own pipeline options, which you have, again, surrounded by gas producers all around Europe. So this was a choice. The US also is probably, if we look at high oil prices in the world, the only missing producer that hasn't come back to pre-COVID production rates is the United States. Again, a policy choice similar to policy choices in Europe. So we have high oil prices today because simply the United States also, its oil production is missing in action. And Europe needs to think, if you're relying on US LNG, again, those prices are going to get higher as US production, as the associated gas isn't as plentiful in the future.
Quick follow-up.
I cannot agree that Europe made so many mistakes. Our one mistake, fundamental, it was to believe Russia that he is a supplier on which we can cooperate. So dependence on Russian gas, not on LNG from the United States or natural gas from Norway. It's okay. It's no problem for us. We don't have enough our own energy resources, especially fossil fuels. We don't have enough. You are in much better position, especially with the point of view of shale gas. Shale gas has changed completely situation in the United States. Maybe you don't remember the situation, but 10, 15 years ago, without shale gas, it was also some problem for the United States because you wanted to take some gas from Canada. And now you've got enough your own gas, and it changed situation completely, thanks to innovation, by the way. But innovation in this field was very, very important for the United States and the whole world, because we started with true natural gas market all over the world, together with your LNG market in the United States. So it means 10, 15 years ago, not earlier. Before that, we had something like oil market all over the world, but not the gas market, because gas depended on the supply by pipelines. Without pipeline, we could not have any supply. Thanks to LNG market, we can help ourselves, and we could have also gas which is more independent for gas pipelines from, for example, from Russia. That was our mistake, at least part of the Europe, because for my country, for example, or for Lithuania, or for Romania, it was absolutely obvious that dependence on Russia could be very, very dangerous. And we tried to explain it to our friends from Germany or sometimes from France or Italy, and they didn't believe us, as a matter of fact.
That being said, and I fully agree, Brenda does make a very important point that by policy choice, the EU is not maybe exploring all of the, especially offshore reserves it has around its borders. I'm not going to open the discussion on shale gas in Europe because it's a touchy topic, but I just want to remind the audience that there is proof, there's official reports that many of the shale gas protests in Europe 7-8 years ago were directly supported by Gazprom, by the way. So Gazprom was one of the biggest opponents of shale gas, even exploration in Europe, not talking about actual delivery or output. Philipp, I want to refer back to you. You talked a lot about technology in your opening statement, and I want to tie it with something which was already mentioned. on the raw materials and dependencies linked with these technologies, and especially when it comes to batteries or solar. I always like to say that we should be very, cautious. We made a huge mistake with Russia on energy. Let's not repeat the same mistake with China on renewables and sustainability, because right now we are sending a lot of money to China when it comes to solar and great technologies. So how do we deal with these dependencies? What's the way forward? And what gives you hope when we talk about technology, by the way?
Yeah, so first of all, I think Brenda was right in her analysis of the gas market or EU gas policy. Those were policy decisions. Those were policy decisions not to have Caspian gas. Those were policy decisions not to have domestic gas. Policy decisions not to develop the hard power that you would need to be active in other parts of the world, to secure projects. I mean, so it is what it is. Now, indeed, you raise a good point, right? We should not repeat this this experience on the raw materials this time, which is why, first of all, I think we need a good mix of technologies to get us to net zero, which includes electric vehicles, but also fuels, renewables, but also other things like geothermal, which is a baseload power generation, by the way, and which doesn't need that many raw materials. I mean, the countries that want to build nuclear energy should probably build nuclear energy. So first of all, it's really having a balanced mix of technologies in the system. And then I think you need to look at raw materials itself, right? So the fact that you are reliant on certain raw materials that are in certain geographies might mean that you might want to replace certain materials. And this is, again, a matter of innovation. Can you replace certain materials to build certain things? The other approach is, of course, can you try to mine things on your own territories or in other countries that are perhaps friendlier to you? Just to say that the venture fund in our organization at Breakthrough Energy is investing alongside the mining cycle or the raw material cycle. So there are new startups in refining, there are new startups in mining and in extraction of materials and also in exploration of materials. So there's a lot of innovation in the field, and we should really bet on innovation to reduce this dependence that is increasing now. Of course, we will not entirely get rid of it, but with a mix of diversification, circular economy, and innovation in the raw material space, I think we can mitigate some of the risks.
So let's diversify on time, basically.
We need to diversify. And what makes me optimistic about technology is, well, from a European perspective, we don't have a lot of raw materials or domestic energy supply. We don't have the biggest or youngest population in the world anymore, but we still have great innovation in Europe. That's, I think, the most important, right? I mean, we're free societies, we're democracies, people can speak their minds, people have freedom of speech. That is very important if you want to develop new ideas and innovate. And that's why we have among the strongest universities in the world, in engineering, in physics and chemistry and many other fields. And we also have a European system through Horizon Europe and other programs that really supports these things. So we're fantastic in generating new ideas and new concepts. The problem here in Europe is we're not scaling these things domestically, and that will and that we've seen, I mean, in the solar industry where the Chinese overtook us with subsidies, that we might see now with the Inflation Reduction Act where the US is really accelerating. So we're now basically in this triangle where China and the US are really speeding up, and Europe needs to think about what's our answer to Inflation Reduction Act, what's our plan to really scale technologies in Europe. And Jerzy Buzek said, yeah, the SET plan, of course, good initiative, but I think we're really still doing things too complicated in Europe. If you go to the US, you get a tax credit of $3 per kilogram of hydrogen that's under a certain emission threshold. Very easy, very clear. People like that, people go there. Here we have a lot of different programs. The SAT plan is one of them, or the Innovation Fund, but it's still very complicated. So one innovator once told us, I have 100 pages application form to fill out and a 2% success rate. So it's not great. So we need to do things easier, a bit simpler and faster. That's my main message here.
It's very, sorry.
Very quick points, please. 20-second points.
Nice gentleman.
start.
On the China issue, I think one geopolitical issue that will be something we should really be thinking about in Europe and the United States is public finance, because the European Union and the European Union public finance institutions, the Biden administration decided no more funding for fossil fuels, including natural gas, which means all over the world, in the developing world, natural gas projects are being developed with Chinese finance and with all the geopolitical strings. So this is a fact. The world is going to develop natural gas. Maybe Europe and the United States can stay in the game a little longer so that these strings are not attached to China.
On the basis of a McKinsey report, about 40% of our climate neutrality in the European Parliament should be based on quite new technologies which are not exist at all. We should create them in the next years. 40% of our climate neutrality. So we don't know anything today about that. So it is so important. Well,
they exist, they're in the lab.
60%, yeah.
No, that means they're
So
not in the market, they're in the lab.
Absolutely crucial issue, innovation and spending money for innovation if we want to be climate neutral in 2050, in 28 years. So we've got enough time, but let us start once again. Great battle for innovation.
Yeah, and let's make sure that we create them in Europe and we sell them, from European companies globally.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at our Slido poll. Sandra, what's the situation there?
Thank you, Dimitar. Indeed, to build on your already interesting discussion, allow me to share the results of our Slido poll asked at the beginning of this panel. The question was, what are the biggest obstacles to building on EU energy union? The most of our audience voted lack of political will with 85%, 8% lack of infrastructure, and 8% voted for too expensive.
Yeah, our audience is quite unanimous that there's not enough political will. This gives us pause, by the way. And also we have another question from Peter Heffele, who's the policy director here at the Martin Center. The question is as follows. The transformation of the industrial sector as a key contributor to achieve 2050 goals is often underestimated. We're underestimating the industrial sector. Is this a new field of transatlantic cooperation? This is the question. I'm looking at you, Brenda. So are we underestimating the industrial sector and how to make it work with the Americans?
I don't see governments having to direct the industrial sector. I mean, I think more what governments need to do in this context is to actually not inhibit the industrial sector. I mean, if we think of things going back even to this question of public finance, finance on its own would want to finance natural gas projects, for instance, around Europe, in the United States, right? But it's actually government that's inhibited this. So, yeah, I don't really see a government role for creating industrial cooperation between the United States.
Basically, don't stand in the way.
Don't stand in the way, yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Can I come in on that?
Yeah.
So there was an agreement between the United States government and the European Commission on a green steel and aluminium deal. That was when they resolved the Trump-era trade issue, and the idea was to develop common definitions of what is actually green steel and what is actually green aluminium, to be able to frame global markets in that direction. And I think it's absolutely crucial. Unfortunately, we haven't seen much happening here. There were things like the CBAM discussion and now the Inflation Reduction Act discussion that came in the way. But I think it's definitely crucial that the two governments work together on this sector because, yeah, it's a main emitter: cement, steel, aluminium, glass, yeah, you name it. And by the way, it's also an area where we urgently need innovation because look at how the gas crisis is now hitting steel, glass, and all these sectors. BASF announcing they will scale down in Europe. That's because of gas supply. So for the sake of the climate and for the sake of energy security, we definitely need to work together on this.
If I may say, it is very important because we should imagine today quite a new energy sector in the European Union all over the world in, let's say, 15, 20 years. Because it will be two energy carriers only, nothing more. Electricity and hydrogen, maybe some biomethane, maybe some, yes, I know, it is very difficult to imagine, maybe some biomass, but but not much more than 5 or 7%. Rest will be electricity from renewables, maybe from nuclear power stations, and hydrogen produced from electricity, renewable electricity. So both sectors interconnected. Hydrogen sector depends on electricity from renewables or nuclear, but nuclear is not quite clean, let's say, but almost clean. And now we should say that some industrial sectors we cannot decarbonize without hydrogen. Steel sectors, fertilizers, for example, is absolutely impossible. It's slightly different in aluminium sector, but both of them need hydrogen itself, not electricity. Electricity is not enough. So from that point of view, if we think on the whole sector in heavy industrial sector, we should think on a hydrogen future, because we need a lot of hydrogen to decarbonize steel industry and fertilizers industry. So it means food security as well, because such an industry produces food for all of us. So we should think always on the industrial sector, like the sector could not manage without hydrogen in the future.
Brenda, as you can see here in Europe, we're quite optimistic about electrification and renewables in the long run. How is the energy outlook going to look according to you in, let's say, 20 years' time? Is it going to be so sustainable and green, or not so much so?
Well, first thing, I wouldn't use the word green and renewable as the same thing. I think we often get them mixed up. Just as our colleague was pointing out all the needs for mining, it's hard to really imagine mining as something that's green and doesn't have environmental impact. But I think we need to be very careful about how we glorify certain technologies before they're commercial, or before we even see the climate and environmental impact. So take the first part of the century, the first decade, the darling was biofuels, right? We were subsidizing biofuels. Poland actually had, their agriculture was getting higher prices.
First generation biofuels.
And then suddenly, after about 5-7 years of all these subsidies for biofuels, we say, oops, wow, this has impact on food prices. Yeah. This has actually, it doesn't really reduce fossil fuels. This is actually drying up a lot of wetlands that we're seeing all over the developing world in order to produce biofuels for Europe and the United States. They're actually destroying ecosystems. So let's not do biofuels. Hydrogen, suddenly hydrogen became the darling, even though hydrogen isn't commercial yet. Now there are new reports on its climate impact. It uses water. And yet already it's billions of dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act and in the last round of European resolution. We talk about hydrogen as a solution when, again, it's not even commercial, and we don't, and even from environmental organizations are concerned about the climate impact. So I think we need to be very careful. Again, like you referred to this McKinsey study, that you pay $1 million to hear that we don't have the solution yet for the future. That was a good investment. I mean, that was it.
Yeah. I agree with you. But we don't have imagined today any other possibility of decarbonization of steel industry except for using hydrogen. Maybe you are right, we should develop quite a new technology. We don't know such a technology yet, I agree with you. But today we think that, especially for producing fertilizers, because we need hydrogen itself as a material for producing fertilizers. So it is difficult to imagine, but you are right. We should think about all the possibilities and all the technologies. I agree.
We have a minute left, so Philipp, the question on political will. You were part of the advisory team to Juncker. Now you deal with policymakers. How do we overcome this political will question? I know it's a tricky one. Is it about engaging with the public? Is it about engaging better with the policymakers? How do we go from there?
Yeah, I think the question was about why don't we have the energy union. Yeah. So I suppose what we understand by that is still that there's a common real energy policy, a common network planning, so for gas, for electricity, for hydrogen, for CO2 infrastructure that goes across borders. And of course, the reality is still the national energy ministers and TSOs are in charge. I think we will soon have the point of truth, because we're in an energy crisis that will not get better next year. And we either, I think, go to a point of disaster for European integration, where member states will stop cross-border trading and will kind of protect their own resources, or hopefully we might get to a point where everyone realizes, okay, we can't really continue with a system of national energy policy. We need to really bring energy policy to the European level, so really build an energy union where grid and other planning decisions are taken on a federal level, so to say, rather than on a national one. And from my experience with European integration, usually it takes a crisis to go to the next step. It takes a crisis to it took a crisis to get to Next Gen EU. It took a crisis to go to Repower EU, and it took also originally the Ukraine crisis to go to the energy union.
Yeah. Hopefully we forge the union through crisis as the Dutch goes.
Political will is absolutely crucial, but on the other hand, acceptance and support from public opinion. If we want to be successful with our European Green Deal, we need support our people in the European Union, all the nations. We should do it together. So we should not go too quickly, is important. To go with stability and strong political will.
Let's hope we keep this attitude from our audience and our citizens as well. Thank you very much, Philipp, Jerzy Buzek, Brenda Shaffer. Thank you so much for joining us.